was selling tobacco. That was a funny one. My friend got some tobacco from Poland. Apparently it was really bad. And that operation was closed very, very quickly.
Welcome back to Growth Under Pressure. I'm your host, Eric Josovitz. Today I'm joined by entrepreneur and podcaster Joe Testouri, a strategist, a podcaster, a consultant, a coach, and a Brazilian Jiu-jitsu beast. Joe, thanks for joining. I want to learn a little bit about your background, but first, I want to give you a taste of your own medicine. So what does growth look like to you?
What an amazing question. And I've asked that so many times to people. First and foremost, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure, and it's great to see that you've brought this actually to life, because a lot of people talk about producing a podcast, but they never get around to it. And we know that you've got a few in the back. What does growth look like to me? I always think growth looked like the cliche, getting 1% better every single day. And it is a form of that. I think growth to me is just a case of making actionable compounding steps every day that moves me closer to the man that I want to be. So I've got a visualized figment of who I want to be at 40 years old. And it's really, when I stripped this back and I sort of came to this goal about a year and a half ago, I really sat down with myself and said, who do I want to be? And it was trying to achieve and become a certain individual by the age of 40. And I'm sure once I hit 40, hopefully, if I get there, and then beyond, that will start to change and adapt. And that's what growth looks like to me. It looks like getting closer to that visualized state of that person who leads with integrity, who respects everyone, and does his best by people.
So growing, not just uncontrollable, but a controlled growth. And like we talked about before, leading with your heart, having integrity. So growing with compassion and love. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to summarize it.
And you've had so many, and for our listeners, you built the Grappling with Growth podcast, and we have the Growth Under Pressure podcast. Just funny that we got introduced, and I created the podcast name before I met you. It just seems so perfect because there are so many founders grappling with growth. Of course, you pick that name and you always ask that question, what is your form of growth? Like, is there one podcast guest, or are there a few other aspects of growth that you've taken away from other people that have joined?
Absolutely. I would say, just being candidly honest, you get some guests who you really rivet in conversating with compared to others. They can just take to camera, or they're curious, or they ask questions. And I will say that every guest that I've had on, I've been able to learn something from everyone. And I was reading something yesterday that was saying you should be able to learn something from everyone, even your enemies or your competitors. And I think it's fundamentally, it's about looking at different worldviews that people have and then taking them in. And I think one of the best things that I've got out of podcasting is I'm just enhancing my worldview. It's like you've got so many different flavors and so many different approaches to one formula, and everyone's done things in a slightly nuanced way. So absolutely, I couldn't pinpoint one guest, because I think that'd be like picking a favorite child, and I know you can't do that. So that would be my my way of escaping out of that question.
Yeah, that's good. And you're a global podcast. You're talking to people around the world. You're based out of the UK. Of course, you're traveling a lot as well, so you're not just there. Um, you know, it's so interesting to me that you can expand your mind to that level. I mean, that's a big aspect of growth. Tell me, let's just learn a little bit about your background real quick. Tell me, what made you jump into entrepreneurship, coaching, mentoring, marketing, of course, and now hosting a podcast, which you just recorded your 84th episode. And I know you're doing more than just that.
Absolutely. So I'll give the listeners a bit of a background to my childhood and then piece that into how that kind of led to the road and route of entrepreneurship. So I was born and raised in London, and most people who are in London now are not born and raised in London. So whenever I'm out and I tell people I'm actually from here, they're like, "Excuse me, how? Why?" Anyhow, so I grew up in inner city London. I didn't really like school altogether. I got bullied quite a lot, and with that, there were a few things that I loved. Um, Professional wrestling, WWE. That was like kind of my escapism when I was a kid. Still love it now. Entrepreneurship as well, and I give a lot of credit to my father. He's been an entrepreneur. He's run his own business since I can remember. We used to go down and we do Sunday markets selling power tools, and with that, and even before, I remember I was 8, 9 years old. I thought, and I didn't even know the word scalability, but I would make comic books, Simpsons comic books, draw them myself, and I tried to sell them at school. And the idea and the concept was actually pretty clever because I generated a wait list. So I went round to all of the kids and said, "Hey, this book's going to cost whatever £2, about $2.50, and if you want one, put your name on it, and I'll get these out next week." And that was crazy. Anyways, that got stopped. But I remember that was the first taste I had of entrepreneurship, and my mum was the person who basically was funding it. She said, "Go for it." And that was the start. And then as I went on, I sell chocolates and sweets at school, kind of the thing to do if you're a little Del boy around here in London. And I always had this spark for just trying to, I don't want to say innovate, but I guess it's arbitrage when you're getting a product from for A and then selling it for Y. It's just figuring out how to be the middleman. So that was the background. Fast forward to university or college for the listeners in the States. I was in a place where I would always just try things. I was selling tobacco. That was a funny one. My friend got some tobacco from Poland. Apparently, it was really bad, and yeah, that operation was closed very, very quickly. But that was just an example. And in my master's year of university, and I'm very grateful for this, I was essentially able to work towards obtaining a master's while starting my original business, Bespoke Brand Developers. And with that, I was doing all the wrong things. I was spending way too long on pretty picture content that was on Facebook that was getting 5 likes and a logo and business cards. But I was really grateful for that because I didn't have the pressure of financial constraints being at uni, just doing this on the side as a bit of a passion project. So at that point, I went into the City of London, worked in banking, worked for an investment bank, but I just knew at that moment I'd rather grow under pressure, for lack of better terms, and go all in on said business. So May 2019, I quit my job, and I always just thought to myself, I can go back to this. I've got a master's, I can get back into the city. What's the worst case scenario? And I think Jeff Bezos, he mentions the point about revolving doors. If you have a door that you can go straight back out through, and there's next to no consequences, okay, the opportunity cost is I don't make as much on savings, or my career progression, if I was to go back into that job, is halted, but I don't want to live a life based off of what if. So I went all in, and the first year was really hard. And I think there was a lack of accountability on myself that you probably know this yourself. It's easy to neglect the things you don't have to do when no one's watching. So it's kind of doing the invisible work that compounds as time goes on. So fast forward to today, that business that originally started as an advertising agency, we pivoted at the start of this year into AI consultant, and that business is now repositioned or rebranded from Bespoke Brand Developers to Bespoke Agency AI. That kind of goes with a sister brand, the Bespoke Academy, which focuses on helping people get out of their jobs and scale their businesses. But the main focus and what we're doing right now is focused on AI adoption, implementation, and essentially making businesses more efficient.
Mm, that's so good. I want to learn what you're doing these days, but I want to go back to what you said about the worst case scenario as an entrepreneur, because that's usually our mindset. It's, hey, if this doesn't work out, am I going to be on the streets begging for money? Or like, am I going to be dead? Our first mindset goes to, and I heard Alex Hormozy talking about this. Of course, he's this extreme version, and he always throws out these really aggressive scenarios. He's like, well, what's like the worst case scenario? Okay, I lose my house, I lose my car. Okay, but I still have my family, and I could go, sleep on a friend's couch, and I'll get back on my feet. And that's, as humans, I think, and that's what he said. We go to this, if it doesn't work out, we're gonna die, and that's just not true. Um, so really love to hear your background growing up in London. So jumping forward now to bespoke AI, and I've seen a little bit of what you're working on and what you've done. So give us a quick snapshot of your company, what you're doing these days, what's driving growth, and how you're able to grow both bespoke and the podcast. Would love to learn a little bit more specifically on, um, you know, what you're doing these days to grow those two things.
Absolutely. So I'll start with the podcast because that's older than the new rebrand. The podcast started with myself and a friend in a fleeting conversation. I was in Australia pretty much this time 3 years ago, and probably as the case as you and John jumping on calls, or everyone's got friends. If you're in the entrepreneurial space, you've always got a friend who does something similar to you. So we would just jump on calls, and the idea was, what if we turned these conversations into a podcast? So we ruminated on the idea for a little bit. That friend's called Errol, amazing friend of mine. We started the podcast initially in January 2023, and it was a crap show. It was really bad, and we were just we had no process, no system, nothing together, and it was just. And I'm really proud and glad we did it that way because, again, to quote Hormozy, or paraphrase him, it's more about the person who just gets stuff done and gets the repetition in, as opposed to just waiting for something to be perfect. Nothing's ever going to be perfect, and if you wait for it to be perfect, you're probably waiting a bit too long. So fast forward from there, he went off, did his own thing. As I said, we're still really, really good friends. And I've just continued the podcast by myself from, I think he left at about episode 20 or just before then. So it's been a bit of a home run, and I can proudly say that I think we've been on a weekly scheduling cadence of a podcast a week for just over a year now, which is amazing. And that has allowed me to just stay really curious, stay really broad in, as I say, my worldview and talking to people. And it's exciting shooting podcasts and talking to guests. And I think it teaches you a new and different lens of humility because you realize, actually, I don't know as much as I think or I thought I did about certain subjects. Talking about bespoke agency AI, that was birthed. I was in Colombia, and I know that you're a big fan of South America. And I read a book on AI, and it was beautiful because I was staying with a friend and his family, but I was doing my own thing. So this was over Christmas, and I'll be curious to learn how you spend that time of year, the gap between Christmas and New Year's. How does that look like for you? What do you typically get up to?
It's, you know, no work pretty much, family. Um, I grew up Jewish, so Christmas didn't happen until I met my wife, and then I got my first Christmas tree, and now we celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah. It's a very interesting uh, time of year, and my wife's birthday is on December 26th, so it's literally like, and then all my kids' birthdays are January 10th, 15th, and 20th. It's like the perfect counting kids' birthdays. Somehow, I mean, I'm just like praying between Christmas and New Year that we're going to be blessed in the new year. Um, but yeah, it's a time when, yeah, I may do a little bit of work on like the 27th, 28th, 29th, getting ready, planning, just all strategy. But it's really just a time to reflect, take a step back, write out, hey, how do I want this year to go? I'm super intentional with everything I put into each year and set really high goals, hit those targets. But if you look at my list, it's both personal and business. So, how can I be a better father? How can I be a better person? What did I do this year? I look back at my goals. So, it's like it's a balance between spending time with family and being intentional and strategic for the new year. Good
That's why
question.
I asked. That's why I asked. I love that little period between Christmas and New Year's because you being someone who runs a service-based business, typically clients aren't talking to you then. That's probably the only period of the year where I found, and then August is a bit of a lull, so it's good to get your holidays in there. But I asked because I was curious to learn your perspective or how you enjoy that period. And for me, it's a big reflection piece. It's you can just go for a walk for the whole day to a park or wherever. And I always get excited about that little small period there. So it was in that period I ended up reading a whole book on AI in about 4 days. I think it was 3 days. And I was just hooked. It was already something that I was really curious about. And I already did some deep research in. So I read that book and then I joined a very advanced AI program. And from there, I just thought, this is where the opportunity over the next at least 10 years is going to be. So for me, being an entrepreneur, you have choices and it's all about what you can control. I can't control if a market is a red ocean or a blue ocean, but I can control what ocean I want to go into. And I don't want to stay in a red ocean. And quite honestly, I was quite tired of operating in a red ocean. So we moved over to the blue ocean, so to speak, that namely being artificial intelligence. And we just got obsessed. We moved away from just pure marketing strategy to development of custom specific systems for our clients and building out workflows and looking at how we can build AI agents. And essentially, we're looking and we've become so, and this is looking at Mark Cuban, all the famous and amazing entrepreneurs who've done so much, but it's about, and this is a big point that I get from my guests, is if you want to become successful in business, you need to become obsessed with your customer experience. And that's really what we've been doing this year. It's about how do we give our clients the best customer experience so we lower our churn rates, we increase our lifetime value, we just do the best work possible, because if we have happier clients, we're going to increase our LTV. So instead of focusing on our LTV, if we focus on the actual input that achieves a higher LTV, then that's really where the work goes to. So right now we're working with coaches, consultants, and talent advisors. Sweet spot is typically $1 million in revenue, and we're looking to 3x their business within a 12-month period by essentially ripping out where they're probably using people, humans, in roles that are inefficient, making those team members more efficient or actually obsolete, and then also building out custom systems to help them acquire new clients. And once they acquire new clients, they've got the cash to reinvest into their business and grow. So that's what we're doing right now.
That's great. So, what is what is the feedback that you're getting from prospects and your clients? And I want to dive a little bit deeper into AI in a moment, but now AI is so prevalent. Everyone knows what ChatGPT is and what the the key AI tools are, but they don't know deeper into the tools that you guys are using. But there are a lot of people that do understand that. What's the feedback that you get when you pitch what you can build for these companies?
The hardest challenge, so as you said, everyone's using ChatGPT now, so it's not a secret anymore. There's nothing to it. And the more sophisticated entrepreneurs, maybe they've got a few stacks of their own. The biggest challenge is going from this is what your problem is to this is what the solution is. And I think what we've experienced is if we can actually demo what a system looks like or actually give people feedback and experience. So one of our main acquisition channels is cold outreach via email. And we've built, for our own business and for a few of our clients, we've built custom AI SDRs. And what that means in layman's terms is, instead of previously having to have a human emailing back saying, hi, we'll book you in for a meeting or an interview or whatever, there's an AI agent which does all the work in the background. So it will analyze Eric's calendar. It will see that you've got, or you've said, I'll only take meetings between 10 and 12 on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then 4 till 6 once I've picked up the kids from school. And then that's that on Monday and Friday. And it will essentially figure out all of the gaps in your calendar and then just book a prospect in to your calendar all automatically. So that's one use case. Now, typically, if you needed an appointment setting agency before, you might have paid them $2,000 per month. But you can get this now all wrapped up into one with an AI agent that can respond to emails within 2 to 3 minutes on the weekends, whenever you want, and it will do a better job than humans 99% of the time. So that's an example. I think there's a lot of skepticism in the market. People are thinking, and there's a bit of resistance as to, does this actually work? So our job, our most important job right now, is to educate people through that process, to show them this is how this system works. Here's a use case as to how it works, and here's our skin in the game. So you're not making a big gamble or taking a big leap to start adopting this, because it's always the first step, you know as well as I do, stepping onto the jiu-jitsu mats. The first step is the hardest, and eventually you're bought in, you feel that trust.
That's really good. I think showing the prospect what you can do, a clear visual example is a great first step. And I've found that sometimes selling a monthly recurring subscription isn't the first start. It's, hey, you know what, we can build this for you. It's a project. And then look, if we hit our goals and you trust us, let us continue to grow your business, right? And I think gaining that trust with people, especially when you talk cold outreach, even referrals a little bit, there's still some level of trust that you have to gain. But with cold outreach, you have to gain their trust, and you try to do that within the first couple of months. And I always say it's cheaper to keep her, right? It's cheaper to keep a client than go get a new one. And I think that's so important. But AI adoption is going to continue to increase. And I think the lesson here is get on the bandwagon, get on or be left behind. Would you agree?
I was reading another quote recently. It was, AI, people shouldn't be afraid of AI, they should be afraid of the people who are implementing and adopting AI. AI right now, I mean, there's a big argument about super intelligence, and that there's a risk factor that loads of world leaders have signed to say that AI is a very big risk to humanity. And Elon Musk has gone on record to say there's a 20% risk that AI will literally wipe out the human race. So that's a real threat that people should be looking at, and that is one of the that is the biggest downside to AI. But right now, you command, let's just take ChatGPT. You've got all of these agents and these LLMs that integrate into large language models, that you integrate into your workflows and everything you're doing, but you're competing against another financial advisory firm. I'm competing against another AI consultancy. We're competing for the same client. So it's about who can use their efficiencies of resources better. There was a stat that I saw recently that was saying by 2035, with the implementation of AI, and it's going to be crazy what's going to happen in the next 10 years, their businesses will become 40% more productive, which essentially means they can have better profit margins, they're going to become more efficient, they can scale quicker, they'll probably be able to put their prices down as well, because essentially it's like rolling out a Ford. If it takes you a week to produce a Ford and it takes 5 different employees, if you can do that through a Fordist production line and it takes 5 hours, then you're working at economies of scale and you're playing different games against your competitors. So yeah, that's kind of my overarching about AI.
And from there, revenue increases and your margins increase. It's twofold. You're getting both. Tell me what you're using specifically in AI, what tools you're using, and you don't have to go down the rabbit hole because I know there's some that, the average Joe is not going to be able to pick up. But for the average Joe and businessman, woman, what are some AI tools other than just the normal ChatGPT uh, can people start using that you'd recommend?
Um, so I'll give you my recommendation if someone was in a account manager or sales role, because that's quite typically what I do day to day. I'll give a few. I'll give my little stack of things that I use day to day that just make me way quicker. And I know there's a few that you use here. So Whisperflow, one that is so powerful. And for those of you who are
Yes.
like, what's Whisperflow? You literally press FN on your keyboard, you talk to your keyboard, and whatever you want to write out, it will. You can just say it, write it down on emails, within search bars, wherever. So I think that's one of the best tools that I use, and you can literally press F on the space bar, you can talk, walk around the room, get stuff done. So if someone's looking at becoming more efficient, that's a really quick tool. There are a few snags with it, but hey, I think that's a nice tool. We put Fireflies note taker into our calls, and I think there's so many great use cases for that. Not only can you get transcripts and summaries of your conversations and then throw it into a presentation builder like Gamma, which is another AI tool, spelled GAMMA.app, Gamma.app. That's a great presentation tool. Again, it's just making you more efficient, quicker. It's more professional than any presentation I'd be able to make on Canva. I remember we had a designer, a London-based designer based in the team a couple of years ago, and I asked her to, and it was a great job, a fantastic job. She made a sales presentation, but it took ages. And when I just compare the investment into Gamma, which I don't know how much I pay, I think it's $10 a month. The point is the investments in most of these tools and tech stacks are so insignificant that if you were to pay someone to do that, or if you go on Upwork and get someone to do this previously, a couple of years ago, you're probably going to pay $300 to get this done. There's going to be things that you have to go back and forth with. And I think one of the smartest ways of implementing AI is if, and I know you've got this in your team as well, but bring in an executive assistant, have them be the intermediary for these lower value tasks, high leverage tasks. Have them do it, teach them the systems, and then go in, overlook it, and then understand what's working where. So that is a quick route of my stack there. The more complex things would be the custom AI agents that we build. We're working on an AI SDR right now, which every week, so we're just testing this out manually, just getting the feedback, put a prompt in. And we use Claude for that just because, as a language model, in my opinion, it sounds more human than OpenAI and ChatGPT. But we're running a weekly prompt where it's going to scrape my LinkedIn, and we're going to test this amongst a few of our clients as well. This is one thing we always do. If we're ever testing a new use case, similar to what you're talking about, to just sell our clients on the innovation, we give them a trial for a month. And that for us it's low pressure feedback for us, it's low risk for them, and it's high reward if it actually does work. And it's very tangible. It's looking at, well, your content, your engagement was X before, now it's this. And essentially what we're doing there is we're able to scrape all of their posts from that month and then see what's the best performing content, look at commonalities between those posts, and then instead of just going back and taking those ideas, it actually spits us out content ideas based off there. So it looks at the content in a creative destruction fashion, where it's not just saying, hey, this is what works really well, saying here's what works really well, here's examples of what we can do, and then we'll iterate it for you afterwards. So that's those are a few of the tools that I use, and those are a few of the innovations that we're working on right now.
We should probably connect on the LinkedIn piece because we paused it. We were using HeyReach, and there were some issues with LinkedIn blocking profiles. So let's connect on that afterwards.
Let's do it.
And to your point on Whisperflow and Gamma is so powerful. You can put your branding, your company branding, and all your presentations can be branded. So Adapt CFO, we got the blue and the white and gray, and
Hmm.
everything is branded for us. And it can, with just a quick prompt, you can create a 10 to 20 or even more slide deck. We'll use it for our weekly company meetings. And nowadays creating an investor presentation, investor deck, which to your point, $300 would be to create like the first page of it. It was more like $3,000, 3,000 US dollars.
Hmm.
And it's also doing the research and giving you TAM and all kinds of things. And of course with ChatGPT powered, you can supercharge it. Whisperflow has been game changing for me because it's cross platform. You can use it on your phone, on your computer, across any apps. I haven't done this yet, but have you seen the snippets that they have in there?
I haven't. Tell me more.
So you can put like a specific shortcut. So let's say, it's like they have the dictionary, so you can start adding to your dictionary. There's certain
Hmm.
words that you say that they don't already
Names.
have. But then
Yeah.
this is like, yeah, this is like, hey, insert my intro email for this. Boom. It'll drop that intro email, drop my Calendly link in there, or drop my personal email in there, and it'll do it for you. So it's like shortcuts.
That's very clever. There you go. And I think one thing about technology now, and this is a big thing that people say before, technology is not the bottleneck for growth anymore. Previously, if you wanted to start an e-commerce business, you would have had to have spent tens of thousands of dollars on a WordPress store, and then Shopify came along, and then you have templates, and then you have everything you can work off. And literally, take Gymshark as an example. They are a probably multi-billion-dollar valued business now, and everything, all of the infrastructure is based off of Shopify. So if you look at that, if you're a clothing brand, a retail store who was thinking of Shopify, you've got a use case there of a multi-billion-dollar brand who's done it through there. And a lot of the time, and again with AI, you can go into AI, and ChatGPT is only as clever to an extent as the prompts you give it. So you could say, operate as a McKinsey and Bain consultant for me who is looking at how to scale this business from X to Y, use Gymshark as a case study, and understand what are the first 5 steps that they undertook to grow their business from zero to £1 million or dollars, whatever. And just thinking and reverse engineering from there. So I really believe that the level and the reach of technology right now, how close it is to everyone, just gives people, everyone is at such a different playing field as to what they were 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. We could probably do a podcast on AI alone, and I'd love to do that one day. This is usually the time where we talk about the growth under pressure moment, and I want to unpack a time in your career when you were like, I don't know if I'm going to make it tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to be here. This is this is a disaster. Can you think of that one time and walk us through the feelings and how you got out of it? Because you did get out of it because you're here now.
That's it. You just you win or you learn. That question is an easy one for me to answer. And I was on a podcast last Christmas. It was one of my friends' podcasts, and I actually spoke about it for the first time publicly then. So it's a very, very clear memory as to what happened. So it was May 14th, 2022. Long story short, I was scammed for just under £53,000. So about $75,000. And it was a long process. It was, yeah. Anyways, I was scammed, and this was my business account, literally more or less everything we had, cash in bank at the time. So it happened, and then I went through this process of chasing the bank up, understanding where the mishap happened and whose liability was, whose accountability it was. And in that period, my main thought and focus was we need to make payroll at the end of the month. And I think just to make payroll, let alone mine, was £10,000, which for me at the time that was crazy. It was like, well, we've got nothing. We need to make 10K by the end of this month. So, and it would be interesting, you as a essentially financial advisory, CFO, what you would recommend. But I turned around. The first thing I did is I maxed out as many credit lines as I could. So I thought, and this was my philosophy, I would rather die on my sword than lie down on my back. I want to make sure that all of the team members are paid this month. And if we can't make next month, then that's it. So be it. I've done the best I can do, and we'll try to survive. And I remember that month, we just made payroll. We ended up getting all of the cash in. We're to say to our sales guys, look, you're not getting bonuses, or you're not getting any commission. That's it. You're getting your base. There you are. It's either, and to be fair, I can't fault anyone in the team. So I give them all credit there. Anyways, long story short, I sat everyone down on an individual call and told them the situation. I thought it doesn't make sense just saying to them on a team call. We had our team call, and I just kind of spun off with everyone individually, said, look, can I swear on this podcast?
Sure.
I said, this is the situation. We're fucked if we don't get this solved. Your jobs, I need you to work like you've never worked before. My sole focus is on sorting this situation out. I'm obviously going to check in every single day, but if we don't get this solved, then there is no business. You do not have jobs next month. Plain as, we'll become insolvent, and there's no pay packages. It's literally, this business is going down, and there's no choice, because we wouldn't be able to make our VAT that was coming up, taxes that were due, as you know, everything that goes into a business. So anyways, I made this, and I remember I was with my mum visiting family in Ireland, and she said something really profound to me. I felt a bit pissed at the moment, but she said, don't be a victim. I was playing a bit of a victim, naturally, as you would. I was just, come on, why has this happened to me? How am I so stupid? Or all of these things. And it just, it was one of those moments. I went on a walk, looked over the cliffs. There's nothing tragic that's coming here. But I just thought to myself, literally, you just got to become a fucking dog. You just got to look at this situation and think, how can you spin it? Just stop wallowing, get up. Yeah, you've had a crappy Friday, you feel down. I had one guy in the team who's a contractor. I said everyone was great. He was a bit of an arse. I said, your job is just to keep this account. And it was a double account. It was a great account that we had. And he just lost it. And I just thought, that showed me who really cared and who didn't. And lo and behold, I got rid of him the next month just because he was toxic to the team. And that whole experience, so to kind of get to the end, it took exactly a month before the money returned to me in the bank. The bank gave us a refund. And again, talking about become a dog, I pretty much threatened my bank at the time and said, if this situation isn't sorted, we're going to take this to the press. And I was like, I kid you not. You might feel like this is, what would you call it, an ultimatum or whatever, but it sure is. And I give credit to the guy who was in charge of finance division there, or the regulatory position. He used to be a financial omnibus, which in the UK is basically someone who looks objectively at something and says who's in the wrong. And he said, okay, I'll tell you what, hands up. We made a big negligible mistake. And I remember the 14th of June, that money came back to me. And I remember reading the email. They sent me an email 4 or 5 days before they sent the money back. And I remember reading it, and it was the longest email I've ever read in my life. My hands were sweating, and I was there. And I remember right at the end, they said, we'll give you your money back. And the guy who I used to run my podcast with, I mentioned to you, Errol, he was the first guy I called because he helped me push it forward to the press. So I can't thank Errol enough. And that's it. And yeah, that was the moment. So that whole month was just a crazy ordeal. But I have to say that was one of the best lessons I've ever gone through in business, and I hope I don't repeat it. But it showed me that, and this was something I never really fully understood until I went through that process. But one of the best pieces of business advice I got from an old client of mine, who is a fantastic guy called Tom. He said, stay as lean as possible for as long as possible. And that was the moment. And if that moment didn't have happened, I probably would have just gone off the rails and just making more money than you could think of, just spending it. I wasn't really managing my finances, but to the point, it really got me to reassess and just think, do you need all of this extra stuff that's going on? And as well, a quote that we use in Jiu-jitsu a lot of the time is, stay humble. You can literally go from here all the way to here in no time. So that's my growth under pressure story.
Man, there's so much to unpack there. Let me start by saying, great job. I'm sure when you found out that the bank was going to cover it, that was your best day. That was the best day in your life. We were, you know, celebrating one of the biggest wins, even though it was just getting back to zero, to net neutral. I always tell my kids, don't act like a victim because no one else is going to feel sorry for you. They're not. You're not going to go out in the street and someone's just waiting for you to come to them and put your head on their shoulder. That's not the way the world works. There are some really good people, but for the most part, you got to take control of your life. Can you tell us exactly what happened with the scam?
Yeah. So what happened was I filled out, and at the time I felt like a fucking idiot. It was so stupid, but I got a call on a Saturday. I finished jiu-jitsu again, ironically, and this guy said, "Hey, is this?" He knew all this info about me. He called me from the bank's phone number, and he said, "Is this Joe Testouri? Yada yada yada. Can you confirm? Were you in Manchester last night at this time?" "No, I'm in London." Again, he knew all of my info, so he he had levels up on me. So we're on this call. He's like, "Okay, there's a transaction for 500 and something pound to this business. Do you recognise it?" "No." "There's another transaction to this business. Do you recognise it?" "No." "Okay, you've been the victim of financial crime." Went on with this tangent. I'm walking back home. And I remember we were on the phone for about 3 hours, and he called himself Mark, um, and he turned around and said that he was there to essentially just safeguard the money from everything, our account. And then this is where my guard started to raise. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to need you to transfer the money from one account to another." And I was like, "Okay, well, pardon my skepticism, but what if this isn't the scam?" And it's their trick of, and it's the thing. And I think at the time I was 27. You think, if this happened to me, I can see how it happens to the elderly, and it's crazy. But there was just like this mental fatigue that he was wearing on, and just putting fear in. Well, we need to protect your accounts. The bank's running a skeleton crew today. And I was like, "Well, look, I'm not sending over any money unless I know." And what he did is, uh, he had the tech in place where he infiltrated all of my text messages with the bank, the one-time OTOs, the one-time
Hmm.
the one-time codes. You know what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
he infiltrated those texts and sent me a code and said, "Don't tell me the code. I'm going to read it to you." And that was it. That's where I got my guard down, and that was it. Essentially, I sent over the money, but it makes me sound very stupid. But in the case, in the scenarios, you've got 4.5 hours of being worn down by someone, in the sense of they've built their guard up, or they've put your guard down, you've built trust with them, they've explained that they know all of these idiosyncrasies about you, your business, that it just it sounds as though it's a guy very high up in a bank in his position. He's called the police to get a crime reference number. All of these just very, very sophisticated, convoluted methods of extracting the right information out from you as time's gone on. I guess he's an expert. He's an expert. He was an expert con man. And yeah, that was pretty much the story.
Well, they've thought of these, you know, these pretty much any um, like pushback or any scenario, they've already thought about all these different paths that it can go, and they're there ahead of you. And it's not wrong to say that you feel stupid, but even in finance and accounting, I've gone through things like that. But it's learning from them to see what you can do in the future, and put those controls in place. And now it sounds like you have those controls in place. You work with a fractional CFO, right? And was that kind of like, how is a good financial advisor uh, been for you guys? How has that helped you?
It's a great question. I would say I've got an amazing accountant right now. He's terrific. He knows everything he's doing. He's so spot on. And I think naturally most business owners they go through the mill with people until they find someone. I guess it's like dating. It's like a relationship. You go through all of these systems, or you go through all of these experiences. And this is a big thing that I've looked at is it's so crucial to make sure you've got the right team and the infrastructure around you. So it's about keeping people, the right people around you. But to your question, I what's the book? It slipped my mind. I think it was the E-Myth, or it was a book that I read a couple of years ago that essentially said the the best teams are split between a finance guy, a sales guy, an operations guy, and you can never find a very, very successful, very good business where the founder, the managing director, does everything. And the way how I see it is, as business owners, we've got all these plates being spun. You mentioned, let's have a conversation about LinkedIn. Fundamentally, you and the team, you're spinning this LinkedIn plate, but it hasn't got enough momentum where it's spinning. And finance, and I was on a coaching call earlier today, but the most important function of any business is cash flow. It's making sure that you're net positive, you're not going to run out of cash, you're not going to get in trouble with the tax man, Uncle Sam isn't going to come knocking, there's no issues there. So why, even though I've got a degree in business, do I think it's clever of me to try and spin this plate that should be spun at 100 miles per hour, or I can just give it to you and you just know how to spin it? That for me is one of the smartest moves that someone can make. And I speak to a lot of newfound entrepreneurs who try to keep their accounting, finance, and cash flow forecasting internally. It's good to have a good insight on it. Absolutely, you need to as a business owner. But if I was to look at anything, I would say the two first roles that I would look to outsource. First role would be finance, because I think you can't mess around with finance and just wing it. It just, that's where you get caught. And I'm sure you've seen some cases where you've started working with someone, you've opened it up and it's a can of worms, and it never works. So I think having the right finance guy in place or girl in place is crucial to any business.
Well, I certainly agree. I I'm drinking my own juice here. I definitely believe that getting a strong CFO, or even just someone, a controller that you can run things by. Like if you got that call and you had a controller, you call them, you say, "Hey, I got this call, want to run it by you." Most likely the first thing he's going to do is, that's not real. Thanks for checking in with me. Don't answer, ignore it. And we
Mm-hmm.
see stuff like that all the time. Love hearing that story. Thank you for sharing it with us. I want to talk a little bit about the startup world and how it can feel dog eat dog at times, which I think it is. It's ground game. Give us the good, the bad, and the truth of being a founder, CEO, and the parts that don't make the highlight reel. And frankly, how does jujitsu help you weather those storms?
Oh, what an amazing question, Eric. The good, the bad, the things that don't make the final cuts, and how does jiu-jitsu help business? I think, and this is a lens that I've really tried to operate from, at least in the last 18 months, and I'll explain why the last 18 months. So in the back end of 2022, I suffered a really traumatic back injury. So I slipped 2 discs in my lower back.
Hmm.
And it was there, happened September 2022, gave me problems until the end of New Year's. And then I was in the gym on New Year's Eve 2022. I was in Vietnam. I was running every day between, again, the Christmas to New Year's period. I was doing 3K a day in Vietnam, going to the gym. I was like, 2023 is going to be my year. I had all of these plans, all of these goals. I want to scale the business to this level. I remember I was just so excited. And I kid you not, with my ex, we went to this beach party in an island off a Vietnamese island called Phu Quoc, I believe it's called. Anyways, went to this party, amazing party, and I was telling her my back hurts a little bit. I've had a history of back injuries. The next morning, I could barely go toilet properly. I could barely bend over. And literally from January 1st, 2023, until near enough the end of the year, soccer, as you guys would call it, football for us, I remember I kicked my first football it was like a week before Christmas. So I just didn't do anything. I couldn't run until the May of that year. I wasn't able to exercise properly. I was there. And I remember saying to myself, the quote is, when you have good health, you want 1,000 things in your life. When you don't have good health, you want one thing, good health. And I always thought to myself, and I literally started 2024 up and said, my number one priority this year is going to be my health. And everything else will be a byproduct. Again, that's kind of like, if I focus on customer experience first, then the input of increased LTV, making more revenue will happen as a byproduct, instead of focusing on the other things. So the big thing that I thought of was health. I think the great thing you get from entrepreneurship is, now at least, pretty much every day I feel grateful for. I feel that I have the privilege of being able to do what I do. I don't say to myself, I have to do this. I literally have my to-do list here, and I keep it so old school, so old-fashioned. I'll never use AI for my to-do list. I'll always keep it, my little sticky notes. I literally just have multiple next to me where I just put down my tasks for the day and just keep it really unglamorous, sorry. But the point I'm making is I think treating every day as though it's an opportunity that I've been blessed to have means that I rarely ever look at things as the negatives. And even when challenges do come, like that Black Swan event that happened a few years ago that was awful, that when something so minuscule happens, like a client churns or you make a mistake, you just realize, actually, these issues are so insignificant towards what I'm doing day to day. So I think the good is that I have the opportunity to come on podcasts like yours. I have the opportunity to work with amazing clients. I have the opportunity to pay people. I've got people in my team that I know, and it's not me sounding arrogant or obnoxious, but I'm changing their lives through the impact and the work that we're doing for clients, and I'm able to pay these people. The bad stuff, the unsexy stuff would be, I suppose, the accounting, having to get statements over, paying the bills. I've got to admit, paying payroll on the last Friday of the month, probably my least favourite activity of the month, just knowing that you've got a whole sum of money that sometimes you look at it and you're like, actually, that's quite nice. But again, that's where integrity comes from, and you just got to do what you have to do. So I'd say, quite honestly, paying people at the end of the month is the least sexy thing. But again, I get to do that. If we didn't make money, then I wouldn't have people to pay. So it's a byproduct. And then I think the things that doesn't really get the limelight all too often is, it's probably just those, I call them trench hours, where you're just in the background, you're doing work that isn't sexy, where sometimes you might go to a coffee shop just to make it a bit more lighter, write in a notebook the plans, what you're going to execute on, what needs to be done. And I think, quite honestly, to put the cherry on the cake there, it's also being critical and honest with yourself and saying, why am I not at the goal that I want to hit already? What are the internal bottlenecks and external bottlenecks that we have in our business right now that I'm not fixing? Because quite often I think entrepreneurs' biggest bottlenecks are themselves. Every business owner I speak to, I'd speak to you, I'd speak to anyone else, I'd say 99% of business owners want to make more money. And if they were critical, they could bullshit people and say, oh, the market, the economy. But I think if they focus more on, maybe I'm selling my own service here, but if they focus more on client acquisition and they thought of, if we literally doubled our outbound activities, if we spent more money on ads, if we just dialed up the cranks, would that help me get to my goal quicker? And I look at myself at times and think, okay, what are the inputs that I'm not putting into my business every single day to hit those goals? So that's probably the thing that isn't really spoken about, but it's just the honest truth that we need to say to ourselves as entrepreneurs is my opinion. And then to your last point, which was, what is jiu-jitsu? How does that connect over to entrepreneurship? I think we used the expression earlier, but just stay humble. And I try not to see things as so much as dog eat dog or competition. I see it as, I've got so many friends who run similar businesses to me. We don't compete with each other because there's enough people out there competing. If you collaborate, you can get much further, much quicker. And that's where I think my mindset shifted. And I think equally in jiu-jitsu, you're a white belt, and I'm sure you're going to get your blue belt very, very soon. But you realize that you're not necessarily competing against the white belts to get your blue belt. It's based off of your journey. If you don't turn up, or if you don't do the work that your coach says to you, then like everyone else can do all the work. They're going to get their white belts. What I've realized, probably the best way to summarize it is, jiu-jitsu and business is not a zero-sum game. It's a game where you can succeed, they can succeed, and that's the same in business. I'd love to get your perspective as well.
I think that whole be humble is in the parallel between, I mean, you said it best, the parallel between business and jiu-jitsu, they're so similar in the sense that when someone starts it, they're scared to start it, or they're interested in starting it, but they have no idea what they're getting into. And even as a white belt, a blue belt, purple belt, frankly, you still don't realize how much further you have to go, and that you do have to show up every day. It's the, you know, and I'm gonna get my blue belt this month, I think. Some things got pushed back, injuries and scheduling, but my coach knows that I show up every day, or every, 3 days a week at 12 o'clock noon, and he knows he can count on me being there. Whereas other people, they get injured, they make excuses. And look, I've I've shown up and it's been painful. My back is hurt, my hip, my knee, and I still do it. I just do it at a different pace. And a lot of it is mental. That's the same thing with business. It's sitting down at your computer, even if your brain is not there, and it's being there for your team, being there for your clients, and still making that, back to the original question on growth. It's just being consistent day in and day out, and approach it with a sense of love. There's a book called Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. And I think this is one book that everyone should read because it teaches you to get out of the box and approach your peers with love. It's like, look, Joe, you could have came on here today and, had a lot of stuff going on, but if I approach you with open arms and come from a place of love, you want to share more, you want to be more open, and that goes back to community and, just like you said, sharing life with other people, other humans that can, that can resonate with you. And that's it. It's being humble, back to your original point.
I just want
Great
to add
place
to
to
what you
wrap
said
up.
there.
Yeah, yeah, please.
I I was talking to a guest on my own podcast today, and he works in the space of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And
Hmm.
I remember when I was working in the city, I really didn't like the environment that I was in. And I think for me, and this is our responsibility as founders, is to engineer the best environment possible for our team members. I never call anyone who works with me an employee, they're team members, because at the end of the day, they've got agency over their lives, and maybe I've got direction over what they do at work, but we're all people at the end of the day, and it's about having that level of respect to people. But I think if we can make environments where work feels like play, and look, things aren't always supposed to be fun, they're supposed to be tough. You're supposed to go through the gauntlet and realize actually this is challenging, because that's where growth comes from, growing under pressure and grappling with growth, if we're going to plug both of our podcasts. So those are my final thoughts.
Perfect. Well, let's wrap up there. I feel we could do another hour, but let's finish up with a rapid fire, quick 3 questions. First one, what's one metric you check every single week without fail?
My bank account.
That's a good one. I know you mentioned LTV, churn. Those are, of course, big ones, but bank account is important, weekly, daily.
Just
Uh,
cash, literally. Just how is the cash reserve doing?
yep. If you see that big change, something's wrong, you got to contact the bank or CFO. Recommend one book, podcast, or speech for the listeners.
Oh, my favorite book of all time is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
That's great. And you mentioned some AI ones. We have some others that we've talked about in the podcast that we'll list. Last question. Complete this sentence for me. A founder under pressure should always.
A founder under pressure should always. Good question. A founder under pressure should always push through the challenge.
Thought you were going to say be humble. Awesome.
Yeah.
Joe, you have a ton of knowledge, man. This was fun. I can't wait till the next time. Thanks again for joining me.
Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate you.
That's it for today's episode of Growth Under Pressure. I'm Eric Josovitz from Adapt CFO, and I hope these insights help you tackle your biggest scaling challenges. If you want to help other founders find the show, give us a quick follow or a share. Thanks for listening, and I hope to catch you next time.